Welcome back to another episode of Shoulders Down. In today's solo episode, we're going to be talking about what do you do if you don't know where to start with figuring out what sounds good? Now, the reason for this episode is because when it comes to intuitive eating, so often the advice you hear is eat what you crave. Just eat what your body's telling you. And obviously, it's so much more in depth than that because if it wasn't, we wouldn't have to have this whole podcast and I wouldn't have this job coaching people to reconnect with their intuition and eat what their body's craving. Part of the reason why it's so hard is because diet culture pulls us away from our body, from our innate wisdom, from our body's intuitive cues, and makes it hard for us to hear those cues and respond to those cues. And over time, the cues can kind of fade to the background because we're not as used to listening to them. So, the work I do with folks is all about reconnecting with those cues, learning how to listen to them. But some people are really overwhelmed by this question of like, what if I don't even know what sounds good? How do I even know where to start with that? And in the previous episode, we talked about why it can be so hard to figure out what to eat. And I talked a little bit about how you probably don't have a lot of practice asking yourself, what sounds good or what should I eat right now? Because you're more used to and you have more practice outsourcing your eating decisions to an outside set of rules and metrics handed to you by diet culture, wellness culture, a family member, a loved one, wherever you picked up those behaviors from. So, in this episode, I wanted to give you some of the tips and tools I have for figuring out where to start if you're really overwhelmed by what sounds good. How do I even know, Leah? How do I ask my body that question and get an answer? I think it's something that we certainly can take for granted if you're someone who has a healthy relationship with food or even, myself, I've now been an intuitive eater for like 12 years, I think, and sometimes I can take for granted that like I have this ability to know what sounds good and to be able to go inwards and get that information from my body. But I remember when that was like, hello, what do you mean you're t just tap into my body and listen to my cues? Like, what does that even mean? And so in this episode, we're going to get really practical with what are some steps you can take to figure out what sounds good or what your body is craving at any given moment in time. But before we get into the episode any further, I want to remind you that I am hosting a workshop called What to Eat on August 10th. And this is a workshop for people who are coming from a history of dieting or following food rules and want gentle structure in figuring out what to eat as you transition into intuitive eating. I am so excited about this workshop. I think that it fills a much needed gap in this work where, you might be excited about food freedom and getting rid of food rules and making peace with food and becoming an intuitive eater. But the idea of leaving behind all your rules and structure and jumping in to intuitive eating feels like free falling. If that is you, then you are definitely going to want to sign up for this workshop. It's called What to Eat. It's $47. You can get $7 off when you use code podcast at checkout. There's more information and a link to enroll in the show notes. And even though the workshop isn't till August 10th, when you enroll, you get immediate access to my ebook called What to Eat, which is a brand new ebook. It's my first time releasing it. And in that ebook, you'll get a lot of the tools and structure that we're going to work with in the workshop. So you can already get started diving into the material. Okay, so let's get right to it. Now, in that ebook that I just mentioned, which you will get immediate access to if you sign up for the What to Eat workshop, I go through something that I call the intuitive eating decision tree. Now, I'm not going to explain the whole decision tree in this podcast, partly because it's much more effective to look at it visually, and also partly because that's for folks who pay for the ebook and the workshop. And I, of course, want you to do that because I think it's an amazing, worthwhile tool. But I am going to talk to you about where the decision tree starts. What is the top of the decision tree? The top of the decision tree is what sounds good to me. Now, this might seem radical because in diet culture, we are never starting with what sounds good. We are starting with, okay, what am I supposed to have? All right, I'm supposed to have this half a cup of oats for breakfast. All right, I'm supposed to have this boiled chicken and broccoli and brown rice for dinner. Okay. And we're starting with what am I supposed to have according to the rules? And then maybe at the bottom of the decision tree, maybe you're like, okay, how can I sparse this up or make this a little more appetizing? What can I add to make it satisfying? With the intuitive eating decision tree structure, that is completely reversed. We are starting with what sounds good to you, and then there are different steps I take you through in terms of how do we make that meal work for how long you need it to keep you full, what kind of energy you want it to give you, and all those other factors. Now, I was showing this tool that I made, the intuitive eating decision tree, to a friend, and he said, he said, oh, I usually think about it in reverse. I start with what I feel like I'm supposed to eat, and then I try to find ways to make it taste good. And he was asking, why does it start with what sounds good? And I explained to him that this decision tree very intentionally starts with what sounds good because satisfaction is one of the core principles of intuitive eating. It should not be an afterthought, as it so often is in diet culture, if it's even a thought at all. Starting with what sounds good as opposed to what am I allowed to have helps approach eating from a place of abundance as opposed to scarcity. When we approach eating while centering satisfaction, we're less likely to ruminate and less likely to have all this food noise, less likely to binge eat, and more likely to feel fulfilled and then move on with our precious lives. And so that is why we start with what sounds good to me. Now, this whole episode is about how do I even answer that question, Leah? What if I see this intuitive eating decision tree and I don't even know how to get past the first question? Well, there's tools for that in the ebook, and there's going to be even more tools for that in the workshop. But for now, in this episode, we're talking about what are some tools to get started with figuring out how to answer that question. So the first tool I have for you is I want you to think about if you were feeding a child, say you were like babysitting or something, and the kid's like, I want a snack. And you're like, okay, what do you want? And the kid's like, I don't know. What would you say? Maybe you'd say, well, do you want something crunchy? Do you want something smooth? Do you want something salty? Do you want something sweet? Pretend that you are trying to find out what the child wants for a snack, except you are the child talking to yourself this way. Does sweet sound good? Does salty sound good? Does hot, cold? Does something rich, something fresh? Starting to ask yourself these kinds of questions. Sometimes we can figure out what we want once we hear it, but also sometimes we figure out what we want by figuring out what we don't want. Maybe as you hear these things, you're like, ooh, no, 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 I'm like nauseated by sweet right now. I definitely don't want sweet. Or, ugh, like anything warm feels like it's going to make me hot. I think I definitely need something cold or room temperature. So it will start to get the juices flowing by listing out some of the different options. And you can treat yourself as you would a child. Now, going off of that, another way to start to figure out what you want to eat is by thinking about how do I feel right now? Am I hot, cold, bloated, sick, tired, stressed? Identifying how we feel can give us clues about what we're in the mood for. So, for example, if you're like, I'm really hot, I want something cold and refreshing, like a smoothie or a salad. Maybe you're like, I'm really stressed right now. I need something comforting, like spaghetti and meatballs, or peanut butter and jelly, or chicken fingers and french fries, some kind of comfort food. Maybe you notice that your throat feels sore and you think, okay, I want something that's going to soothe my throat, like a warm soup or like a cold ice pop or ice cream. All of these are potential examples of how thinking about how you feel physically in your body might give you some information about what you're craving. Now, the next tip I want to caution with and say, like, this is not meant to be turned into a diet rule. It just can be another tool or source of information. One way you might think about what you're craving is you might think about what are the kinds of things you've eaten that day. Now, for example, say for breakfast you have oatmeal, and for lunch you have a sandwich and chips, and for snack you have a piece of toast with butter and jam or something. When it comes time for dinner, if you feel stumped, you might think, okay, what did I eat so far today? Okay, I had a big bowl of oats, or maybe it was cereal. For snack, I had toast. For lunch, I had a sandwich and chips. Hmm, what was represented in those meals? Okay, oats is mainly carb heavy. Toast for snack, also carb. Lunch, obviously, depending on what's on the sandwich, you're gonna have different like protein and fat in there, but also some carb from the bread. Maybe you think, oh, okay, maybe I'm wanting something that's more like protein and fiber forward. Maybe that's like a brown rice or a quinoa or I don't know, a sweet potato type thing versus something that is more carb forward. And of course, brown rice, quinoa, sweet potato all still have carb, but they're more like complex carb forward, which is totally, totally fine. And maybe you get the idea of, okay, maybe I'm craving something that's less carb forward because I had more of it earlier. And this, we have to be careful. We don't want to turn this into, I have to eat something lower in carb because I had more carb earlier. It just can be a clue of, is it the case that your body is saying that, or maybe it's not. Sometimes it's not, but it can be a clue or a way to prompt some kind of information if you're completely stumped with what am I craving. Now, this can go in reverse too. Maybe you have a day where you have like a smoothie for breakfast, and for snack, you have like fruit, and for lunch, you have a big salad. Maybe that night you're like, what did I eat today? Okay, I had a salad, which is a lot of fiber. I had a smoothie, which is like blended up fruit, which is even more fiber, and of course some carb from the fruit. I had fruit for snack, even more fiber and some carb. I haven't really had a lot of carbs or fat, maybe a little fat from the salad, if there was like nuts or avocado or oily or creamy dressing. But okay, maybe for dinner I need something more rich in carb and fat. Maybe I need like a pasta with a creamy sauce or a burger and fries or something. I don't know. Maybe that helps you think about, would that sound good? So again, this is just another tool, but we don't want to turn it into this thing where we're like checking what we ate in the day and not allowing ourselves to have something if we feel like we've eaten too much of it. It's just another way to think about what might really sound good in my body right now. Sometimes I even do this with like, oh, I had a lot of meat. Maybe for breakfast I had like something with bacon or sausage or something. And for lunch, maybe I had something with chicken or some kind of meat. Okay, maybe this is a night where my body might be asking for more non-meat stuff for dinner. Maybe not. Maybe I say that to myself and then I'm like, oh no, I want meat tonight. And I'm like, okay, well, now I know, right? Sometimes by making the suggestion to our brain, we can see, are we rejecting it or are we embracing it? What is our body saying? So that is another tip that you can use. And another tip that I want to add here is thinking about the season. Sometimes what we crave switches with the season. So maybe when it's cold out, you're like, ooh, I'm wanting more like warm soups and stews. And then when the weather starts getting warmer, you might crave more fresh things and roughage or things that are cold or room temperature. Maybe when it's like an in-between season, you could go either way and it doesn't feel like, something like fall or spring. Maybe you're not noticing so much one way or the other. Sometimes we start craving things that are seasonally available. Like right now, I'm in California and there's a lot of peaches and cherries, and I'm really grateful to have access to those fresh produce and also like heirloom tomatoes. Maybe I think about that and I'm like, ooh, I want like a peach burrata prosciutto salad. I don't know. I just made that up, but like, yum, that sounds so good. Well, I didn't make that up. It's like definitely on menus places, but so that can be another clue about what we might be craving. So to recap, if you feel lost when it comes to what am I craving or what sounds good, you are not alone. If you've been dieting or restricting for years, you're not used to asking what sounds good. You're only used to thinking about what you're allowed to have. It can take practice to be able to put your finger on exactly what you're craving. In this episode, we talked about some tips, which were talking to yourself like you would a child, figuring out what you want by figuring out what you don't want. If you hear one of the options that you list out and you go, oh no, I definitely don't want that, then you might ask yourself, what about that am I not wanting right now? And then that could give you more information with how to move forward. We talked about asking yourself, how do I feel? Am I bloated or sick or tired or stressed? And using that information to give you clues about what you might be craving. We talked about thinking about what you ate earlier in the day and using that as information without being rigid about it or making it into a diet behavior. Only use that tool if you feel like you can wield it without making it disordered. And then we talked about seasonality, what's the weather doing outside? Is that impacting what I'm craving? What is available this time of year? Might that be impacting what sounds good? So those were my tools for you and how to figure out what you're craving if the question, what sounds good right now, feels overwhelming. Now, again, this question, what sounds good, is the very top of my intuitive eating decision tree, which means it's like the first question, and then it branches off and asks you a bunch of different questions to figure out what to eat. Now, if you want to learn more about the intuitive eating decision tree, you're definitely going to want to enroll in my new workshop called What to Eat, hosting it on August 10th, 2026. And once you enroll, you get immediate access to my ebook, What to Eat, which has the decision tree and several examples and explanations of how to use the decision tree all laid out in it. The workshop is $47, but you can get it for $7 off when you use code podcast at checkout. So you can head to the link in the show notes and learn more and enroll in the workshop. And I'd love to see you there on August 10th. That is all for today's episode, and I will chat with you in our next episode.